Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with our preview video on the 10 best recordings of Thomas Beecham. And in order to understand how the 10 best recordings of Thomas Beecham came to be, we need to talk about laxatives. But before we talk about laxatives, I'd like to ask you, if you have not yet, to please consider becoming a ClassicsToday.com insider, because the video on the 10 best recordings of Sir Thomas Beecham is only available to ClassicsToday.com insiders on the homepage of ClassicsToday.com. We've been having a wonderful time. We've got more than a dozen, I think, now of these conductor videos, plus thousands of other reviews and all kinds of fun stuff that you can look at as a ClassicsToday.com insider, including CDs from hell and all the big box sets reviewed and all that kind of stuff. By category, you can search them every which way. It's really quite handy. So there is a link to become a ClassicsToday.com insider on the homepage at ClassicsToday.com, and below this very video in the description of it, if you want to take a look at that. And I want to thank you so much for your consideration. But now let's get back to the serious shit. And I do mean that, because we're talking about laxatives. Yes, in 1842, Thomas Beecham, the grandfather of our Thomas Beecham, established or founded or invented Beecham'S pills. Now, Thomas, the granddad, had been a shepherd, and believe it or not, and then a peddler before he invented Beecham'S pills, which were designed to be a tonic that were good for like everything. You know, they were supposed to cure, whatever ailed you. But what they really were was a laxative. And one way you could tell they were working is because you were going. I suppose that was a clue. Anyway, here's an ad for them, an old ad for them from like the 1850s or so. Really wonderful, wonderful stuff. It was for bilious, noxious vapors and other things that happened to you back in the day. And of course, laxatives were a big thing in the 19th century, as they are today, but they were even bigger back then, because anybody who knows anything about English cooking knows that you're going to need a laxative. And how the British Empire got itself going before the days of laxatives, I have no idea. None whatsoever. So anyway, the old Thomas, Grandpa Thomas, had a son, I believe his name was Joseph, and Joseph had a kid named Thomas, who was our Thomas, the conductor. And he decided to spend his family's, by then, considerable fortune, an enormous fortune, on music. Specifically, music that he could conduct. He studied composition for a while. He wasn't very good at it. Then he decided he wanted to be a conductor. He was really a terribly spoiled rich kid. That's basically what he was. He was used to having his own way, to doing whatever he wanted. And he regarded music as sort of this gigantic, expensive toy that he could play with. And fortunately for us, he was a brilliant musician. He was really good at what he wanted to play with. He wasn't a dilettante. He wasn't faking it, although he was completely self-taught as a conductor. In order to learn how to conduct, he simply formed his own orchestra, the Beecham Symphony, and started conducting it. And that was what he did. It was really it's an amazing story, actually, because when you realize that the performing arts infrastructure of the modern UK would not have existed had it not been for laxatives. And that's the truth. That's the truth, because the conductor, Thomas Beecham, when he wanted to do something, he had to pay for it. So what did he pay for? He paid, he and his dad eventually bought the land on which Covent Garden sits, for example, and he paid for season after season after season of money-losing opera, extraordinary opera. He did premieres, for example, of Strauss's Elektra. He did big, major ring cycles. He did lots of opera at a tremendous, tremendous loss. And really, when you think about it, it's an extraordinary thing. He founded the London Philharmonic, and when they wanted some independence from him, he, of course, decamped and founded the Royal Philharmonic, both of which still exist. And so, like I said, there would be much less performing arts infrastructure in the United Kingdom had it not been for Thomas Beecham, who did it all on the back of his family's fortune. And even more extraordinary, I think, which is even funnier, really, when you think about it, is that around the turn of the century, Thomas's father, Joseph, who had been subsidizing his son, decided that he was upset with his wife. So he had her committed to a mental institution. And she, we don't really know why, but she was committed to a mental institution, probably because she got huffy when she caught him with the chambermaid or whatever he was really doing, whoever he was boffing or diddling, whatever they did in those days. So, if that happened and the woman of the house objected, you simply stuck her in a madhouse. It was a good way to deal with her. If you weren't going to put her in the attic, like, of course, they did in Jane Eyre, but that was earlier. They stopped using attics for crazy wives, and she wasn't crazy anyway, or supposedly not that crazy anyway. So our Thomas and his siblings went to court and got her out, and because they got her out, their father disinherited them all. Now that was a serious problem, and it was 10 years until they were on speaking terms again, and Thomas was re-inherited, or undisinherited, or disinherited. I don't know how you say that. But, the fascinating thing about this particular little tidbit of trivia is that had it not been for their eventual reconciliation, then the performing arts infrastructure of the modern United Kingdom would not exist. And it was all because Joseph decided to put his wife in the loony bin, and Thomas took her side, that peril came to be, and was only avoided a decade later. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You really can't. It's just beyond belief. So Beecham basically, he founded first the Beecham Symphony Orchestra, then the London Philharmonic, then the Royal Philharmonic, and the opera seasons at Covent Garden and elsewhere. It wasn't always at Covent Garden. It was in different theaters, wherever he could get it together and whenever he had the money to spend. Now, Beecham's Pills, Beecham, the company, is still around. It was actually merged eventually with SmithKline, which became SmithKline Beecham, you may recall, a billion years ago. And now it's GlaxoSmithKline. And they still use the Beecham trademark for their cold remedy. And here it is. There you go. It's still out there, and that's the same Beecham. And here's another interesting bit of trivia you may want to know, which I think is equally fascinating. There is another composer who was also equally dependent on the chemical business, and was also the child of the wealthy family that owned the chemical business. Do you know who that was? It was Poulenc, because Roan Poulenc, the company Poulenc, that's still around too. Poulenc was another person who got rich on the shoulders of his parents' investments and ownership of drug companies. Eventually was a drug company. And so, we have classical music because of certain pharmaceuticals and because of the indigestibility of English cooking, which has gradually changed. And that's the truth, because I've been there, and, you can still get the indigestible stuff, but the awakening of the British to actual, decent cuisine was a little bit later, but rather similar to what happened in the United States, with the advent of Julia Child and those people and the fine dining experience. So yes, the use of laxatives may not have decreased all that much, but at least the quality of the food that we're laxatizing has increased. So anyway, Beecham is a remarkable character. He was an incredibly funny guy. His bon mots were legendary. It was Beecham who described the sound of the harpsichord as two skeletons copulating on a tin roof. It was Beecham who, during the Second World War, when he went to Australia, they asked him what he was doing there, and he said, well, the government declared a state of emergency, and so I obediently emerged. And then, which got him into trouble. And then on the return trip, they asked him when he was coming back to Australia, and he looked at the reporter and said, does anyone ever come back to Australia? I mean, that got him in trouble. He had a tendency to speak his mind because he didn't care, because he was rich, and rich people can get away with stunts like that. It's absolutely spectacular what he was able to do. And because he was rich, because he was obscenely rich by the standards of the day, and could do whatever he damn well pleased, he did not have to make his career doing the kind of music that everyone else did, especially because he was self-taught. He was not in love with the German classics. I mean, he loved some of them. He loved the classical period. He loved Haydn and Mozart, above all, probably Mozart. But he wasn't taught that he had to. He came to it because he wanted to. He discovered Delius. He made recordings of lots of obscure French music and people no one's ever heard of before or since. He was only interested in what he was interested in doing. And that gave him freedom. And because he was musically unbelievably talented, thank God for that, his performances had unbelievable conviction and character and personality. It was his personality. And thank goodness for all of that, which means that his recorded legacy is like no other conductor who's ever lived. It really is special because it reflects simply his taste. And he was, it's amazing, he got record companies to go along with his taste. How much of it he paid himself, who knows? But he did so many things for music, not just in the UK, but everywhere else too, as a result. You know, it's spread out. He spent time conducting at the Met. He conducted the Seattle Symphony for a while. He was all over the place. He was in France because he loved French music. He was not your typical English, insular, type, Britophile conductor person. He just wasn't because he didn't have to be. And he didn't care about the establishment. He was the establishment. And so he used the freedom that he had because of his wealth simply to enrich musical culture generally. I mean, it was it was at once as selfish as you could possibly be because he was, like I said, a spoiled, narcissistic, rich kid. He was a baby, basically. But on the other hand, completely selfless. It was a win-win situation for everyone. All they had to do was let Beecham do whatever he damn well pleased, and the whole country was going to be the beneficiary of whatever he damn well pleased. Well, there may have been some repertoire that, raised an eyebrow or two. But essentially, he was a one-man musical cosmos. And I am going to be delighted to tell you over on ClassicsToday.com what his 10 best recordings are. I hope you're going to join me for that, and I hope this has piqued your curiosity because I got to tell you, there's some stuff in there that nobody else did or nobody else did as well, and some stuff that other people did, but he did like nobody else did. And to a certain extent, nobody else did as well. He was a marvel. Absolutely a marvel, and there will never be his like again. It was a perfect circumstance of him stepping into a void and filling it and having the resources to do it, and at a time when there wasn't anybody to stop him. There was no musical infrastructure that was powerful enough to stand up to him, to the force of his personality and the power of his money. And goodness gracious, there's an enormous dissertation that could be written about this guy. And someday someone's going to do it. But until then, we have the recordings to enjoy. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me in this little tiny disquisition about Thomas Beecham. And go over to ClassicsToday.com and let's find out what his 10 finest recordings are. You're not going to want to miss them. Thank you so much. Take care.